Welcome back, everyone, to Sip and Talk. Today, we're getting into something that looks like just another online fan squabble on the surface.
Yeah, but it's really so much more complex, isn't it?
Definitely. We're talking fantasy, cultivation, deep history, and, well, a pretty significant psychological thing happening in Chinese online spaces.
It's fascinating. It really centers on Xianxia. You know, those epic Chinese stories. Immortals, heroes, cultivation, becoming powerful. Hugely popular domestically.
Right. I've heard of the genre.
But the key thing we're digging into today, based on listener requests actually, isn't just that people enjoy Xianxia. That's normal.
Okay.
It's the compulsion some seem to feel to promote it by really aggressively, systematically tearing down Japanese manga and anime.
Wow. So it's like cultural promotion by demolition.
Pretty much. That's a good way to put it.
So our goal today, what we want to explore is why. Why this specific approach? Elevating your own culture by actively belittling someone else's. It feels like more than just taste, right? It feels strategic.
Exactly. It's a social, maybe even a psychological strategy. We need to figure out what's driving this, this really aggressive cultural competition.
So we're asking some big questions.
Yeah, like why the constant need to put down a neighboring culture's creative work? How does all this tie into things like collective trauma, nationalism, maybe even a hidden self-doubt?
And the big one for me, how do you square all the online boasting, that whole we're leading the world narrative, with what's actually happening in the global market?
That's crucial. We have to look at the numbers.
And also what happens to the people caught in the middle? The ones who might, like both. Where do the rational voices go in all this noise?
Let's try to unpack it all. Maybe start with the actual cultural battleground itself.
Sounds good. Let's define the scene.
Okay, so the conflict, it's really intense. You see it everywhere on the big Chinese internet platforms, Bilibili, Weibo, Douyin.
Right.
And there's this very clear, almost enforced split. Xianxia gets presented as the top tier, the elevated culture. Manga gets deliberately positioned as inferior, belittled.
Okay, let's make sure everyone's on the same page. Xianxia, we know, immortals, martial arts. But what are the specific qualities that fans highlight when they argue it's superior?
The big emphasis is always, always on cultural depth.
Yeah.
They'll stress how Xianxia stories are supposedly steeped in classical Chinese philosophy, especially Taoism.
Okay.
And built on the older wuxia traditions, the martial heroes. The stories are often incredibly complex, spanning huge timelines.
Right.
But the real hook, the core appeal, seems to be that central narrative. Kongruo.com, going from weak, sometimes really weak, to incredibly powerful.
Through hard work, cultivation.
Exactly. Through diligent cultivation, overcoming these huge, often cosmic challenges.
That theme, defying fate, rising up from nothing.
Yeah.
That must hit hard in today's world, like a psychological release valve.
Oh, absolutely. It's described as a powerful form of spiritual compensation. Think about if you're facing intense pressure, maybe stuck in that 996 work grind.
9 a.m. to 9 p.m., 6 days a week.
Yeah. You feel constrained, maybe powerless day to day, but then you read or watch Xianxia, and your hero, your avatar in a way, is achieving Nitian Diming, literally defying heaven and changing fate.
Wow.
It offers this narrative of ultimate control and transformation. It directly speaks to that feeling of modern helplessness.
Okay, so that's the elevated side. How do they frame manga within this kind of superior setup? How do they dismiss it?
They use some pretty specific critical terms. Manga often gets labeled zufu bushi.
Meaning?
Kind of. Virtual, unreal, lacking substance, flighty, or it's dismissed as jing'er.
I've heard that one, like 8th grader syndrome.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Childish, juvenile, overly dramatic. And the key criticism is that it supposedly lacks the philosophical or historical weight that they claim Xianxia has. The argument often goes, manga characters get power too easily, maybe through luck or just being born special, whereas Xianxia characters earn it through this really grueling philosophical process of cultivation.
What's striking is that it's not just saying, I prefer this. It sounds like a moral judgment.
It absolutely is framed that way sometimes.
Like, it's not enough to prefer the complexity of your own stories. You have to argue the other culture's stories are fundamentally shallow or even bad.
And that takes us right to the heart of this cultural superiority complex we're seeing. Outwardly, the message is pure confidence. You hear the phrase, Zhonghua Wenhe Buddha Jingshan, a lot.
Which means?
Chinese culture is broad and profound. It's a statement of immense cultural pride.
Okay, but here's the thing. If you genuinely feel secure in your culture's depth, why the constant need to aggressively point out how supposedly inferior others are? It seems unnecessary.
That's the psychological tell, isn't it? The confidence often comes across as really defensive. It suggests there's this underlying anxiety about culture.
So the comparison isn't about appreciating different styles, it's about establishing dominance, maybe to soothe some kind of self-doubt.
That seems to be a big part of it. We saw a real spike during the popularity of that Xianxia drama, The Kalman Shu. Remember that?
Vaguely, yeah. It was huge, right?
Massive. And on platforms like Bilibili, the comments weren't just, wow, this show is great. There was this simultaneous flood of comments saying Xianxia is more real, more mature than Japanese anime, calling anime false fantasy.
So the success of the local thing had to be validated by trashing the foreign competitor.
It's like they couldn't just let it stand on its own merits. It needed the comparison to feel complete.
So in this kind of perceived cultural war, it becomes zero-sum for national pride. For Xianxia to be seen as truly great, manga has to be framed as, well, childish junk.
Exactly. And that level of defensiveness, that intensity, it suggests the roots of this go pretty deep, maybe into historical memory.
Yeah, let's talk about those roots. It feels like there has to be a historical angle here.
Oh, definitely. You can trace this posture back quite directly, actually, to historical context, specifically the concept of the century of humiliation.
Right. The period from roughly the Opium Wars up to the end of World War II.
Exactly. Generally defined as 1839 to 1949. It covers these incredibly traumatic events, the Opium Wars, all the unequal treaties forced on China, foreign concessions, and of course the brutal Japanese invasion and occupation.
And this isn't just dry history in a textbook over there, is it? It's woven into the national story.
Deeply. It's a core part of the mandatory national education curriculum. It shapes this living collective trauma.
Creating a sense of victimhood.
Yeah, a lasting sense of victim mentality. The narrative is, China was once the great central civilization, but then it was humiliated, carved up, exploited by foreign powers. The story of past suffering becomes a really powerful driver for present-day feeling and action.
And connecting this back to Xianxia, you mentioned the Nitian Abing theme, defying fate.
It's a direct parallel. The hero's journey in Xianxia, rising against impossible odds, often cosmic odds, mirrors the national narrative of Chinese revitalization, overcoming humiliation, regaining strength.
So consuming Xianxia isn't just entertainment, it's like participating in the national comeback story.
Precisely. It offers this potent spiritual and narrative compensation for those historical wounds. You're internalizing and sort of reliving the national story of triumph over injury.
Okay, that historical trauma provides the fuel. What's the psychological engine turning that fuel into this specific behavior, the aggression, the need to belittle others?
We're likely looking at something akin to Alfred Adler's concept of compensation for inferiority.
Okay.
Or what some sources call bechangshuangzida, which translates roughly to compensatory pride or even compensatory arrogance.
Adler's idea being
that when a person, or in this case a collective group, feels fundamentally threatened or inferior, maybe historically, economically, culturally, they often overcompensate by aggressively puffing themselves up, elevating their own status, and crucially, by demeaning outsiders. Putting others down makes them feel bigger.
So the aggression isn't coming from a place of secure strength. It's a reaction against a perceived weakness or past hurt. It's a cultural overreaction almost.
You could definitely see it as a form of cultural revenge, maybe unconsciously. The aggression is fueled by anxiety, especially anxiety about foreign cultural influence. Japan is a particularly complex case here, right?
Because of the wartime history and Japan's huge cultural success in Asia later on.
Exactly. Decades of Japanese pop culture dominance across Asia, including China, since the 80s. So symbolically diminishing Japanese culture becomes a way to try and resolve that historical trauma and maybe reassert dominance.
This points towards a very specific psychological structure. High internal pride, but low external openness or trust. Is there data on that?
There is, and it's pretty striking. Pew Research Center did a global survey in 2023. They found that 84% of Chinese respondents believe their culture is superior to others. 84%.
That's incredibly high. The highest globally, you mentioned.
By a significant margin, yes. Massive internal pride.
But what about the other side? Trusting the outside world.
That's where it flips. The same survey found only 28% of Chinese respondents said they trusted the outside world. That's very low internationally.
Wow. So huge pride inside, deep suspicion outside.
It paints a picture of a highly defensive structure. Immense internal pride coupled with profound external suspicion and low openness. It's like a psychological perfect storm for this kind of cultural aggression.
You have to believe you're the best, but you also deeply fear or distrust the outside might undermine you.
Right. So you can't just enjoy your own culture quietly. The psychological win seems to require tearing down the other, especially the cultural output of a historical rival like Japan.
Okay, so we have the deep psychological roots in history and trauma. But this isn't just happening in a vacuum. These feelings are being amplified, maybe even directed, by bigger systems, politics, the market, the platforms themselves.
Absolutely. Let's start with the political dimension. The state plays a role, often through official policy pushes.
Like what?
There's been a very concerted push for cultural confidence wenhuazichin and promoting the guoxiao, or national trend.
Which encourages buying domestic brands, watching Chinese media.
Exactly. On the surface, it looks like standard stuff supporting local industries. Many countries do that.
What?
But the way it's often implemented subtly links consuming domestic culture directly to patriotism, to national identity.
Ah, so it frames culture as a battlefield.
It can definitely set it up as a zero-sum game,
Okay.
or even more intensely, a cultural war. If the official narrative suggests that consuming foreign stuff, like manga, could be somehow bad for the national image.
Then attacking manga and promoting Xianxia becomes a patriotic act.
Precisely. It validates the aggressive fan behavior, gives it a veneer of virtue. Think back to 2014, there was an official critique, widely publicized, about the cultural impact of Doraemon.
The blue cat robot, seriously?
Seriously. It was framed in some official commentary as a potential tool of Japanese cultural infiltration.
Mm-hmm.
Once the state frames a beloved foreign character like that, it totally shifts the conversation online. Netizens then feel like they have a duty to push back, to promote Xianxia, to save the national consciousness from these perceived foreign threats.
Okay, so politics provides the framework. What about the money? This Xianxia stuff is big business, right?
Huge, gigantic. It's not just culture, it's a massive, highly profitable domestic industry. Just the web novel market in China, which is where a lot of Xianxia originates, was estimated around 20 billion RMB in 2023.
20 billion RMB, okay, that's serious money.
So when you have an industry that big, protecting it isn't just about culture anymore. Cultural defense becomes commercial defense.
Meaning the industry players, the platforms, maybe even influential fans use this us versus them narrative to keep people hooked on domestic content.
It's an incredibly effective strategy. It drives traffic, builds loyalty, creates this exclusive, nationalistic, our story vibe around the products, and allows them to conflate domestic commercial success, selling lots of novels, or getting millions of views within China, with some kind of objective global proof of national superiority.
You mentioned an example earlier, the 3 Lives, 3 Worlds plagiarism case. How did that fit this pattern?
It's a perfect, if unfortunate, illustration. The author of that massively popular Xianxia story, 3 Lives, 3 Worlds, 10 Miles of Peach Blossoms, faced very credible accusations of plagiarizing large parts of an earlier, less famous novel and changing it from a BL, male-male romance, to a heterosexual one.
Okay, normally the debate would be about the plagiarism itself.
Right. But in the Chinese online sphere, a huge number of supporters completely sidestep the ethical questions, their defense. Aggressively claim that Chinese Xianxia is superior anyway.
Period.
Yeah, or argue that even if it was copied, the story was improved by being put into the superior Xianxia format. The need to defend the national cultural product overrode basic ethics around intellectual property. Nationalism became an ethical shield.
That's really telling. And then you have the platforms themselves, Bilibili, Weibo, Douyin. They're not neutral actors here, are they?
Not at all. Their business is designed to maximize engagement, keep users scrolling, clicking, commenting.
And what gets the most engagement?
High emotion, conflict, outrage. Nationalist rhetoric, especially when it's aggressive and targets a rival like Japan, performs incredibly well algorithmically.
So the platforms are actively rewarding this behavior.
Seems like it. Plus, anonymity makes it easy, right?
Yeah.
Lowers the social cost of being aggressive. People feel safe calling manga trash or whatever online. Some studies on these platforms have apparently shown that really emotional nationalist posts can get like 40% more interaction than calm, thoughtful discussion.
Which inevitably leads to
An echo chamber. The algorithms filter out the moderate middle. They amplify the loudest, most extreme voices until they seem like the only voices. It creates this distorted reality where the aggressive minority looks like the national consensus.
And this is the system that ends up projecting this image to the rest of the world, an image that often seems pretty alienating.
Right. So we've got the psychology, the politics, the market forces, the platform dynamics, all pushing this narrative of superiority, this constant refrain of Yao Ningqian.
Remotely leading. Yeah, we hear that phrase a lot.
But now we have to do the reality check. Is the boasting actually justified on a global scale? Let's look at the hard data, the actual market influence worldwide.
This is where the online story might hit a wall, right?
It hits a very, very big wall. When you compare the actual international reach and revenue, those claims of global leadership just evaporate. The economic gap is massive.
Okay, lay it on us. The numbers for 2023. Let's start with Japan anime and manga. What's their overseas ecosystem worth?
Okay, so for the whole Japanese content package, manga, anime, all the merchandise, licensing, broadcast rights sold outside Japan, the global overseas revenue is, well, it's staggering. We're at $110 billion USD.
Whoa. Billion with a B.
Billion with a B. And just the manga content market alone, internationally, is about $14.7 billion USD of that. That's the benchmark for global cultural export success.
Okay. $110 billion. Truly global. Now, compare that to Chinese Xianxia and web novels. What's their global overseas revenue, specifically the content export?
So the Chinese web novel industry's overseas revenue, this includes Xianxia, fantasy text content translations, the core cultural export is estimated at about $600 million USD. Million with an M. About 4.35 billion RMB.
It's 600 million versus 110 billion. That ratio is huge. Is that even a fair comparison, though? Anime includes merch, movies, games.
That's a fair question, and the sources do address it. Yes, the $110 billion is the whole ecosystem. But even if we try to compare just the core content web novels versus manga sales, print and digital, the gap is still enormous. That 1.180 ratio reflects the total influence.
Okay.
If you narrow it down, that $600 million from Chinese web novels overseas is only about 5.5% of Japan's content-only overseas revenue, the $14.7 billion manga market. So that claim of remotely leading the world, it's a narrative that's just completely disconnected from the financial reality of cultural exports.
But that massive success inside China must make it hard for the average person online to see that global picture.
Absolutely. It creates a kind of cognitive bias. They call it the sitting in a well, looking at the sky mentality.
The frog in the well who thinks the well opening is the whole sky.
Exactly. The huge domestic user base, platforms with over 100 million active users, creates this illusion that domestic popularity equals global popularity. It's the availability heuristic. You only see your own success stories amplified, so you assume everyone else sees them too.
So what happens when someone does present this data? When faced with that massive 1.180 revenue gap, how do the extreme nationalists react? How do they maintain the superiority narrative?
They pivot immediately, aggressively. They shift the goalposts. Since they clearly can't win on the economic numbers, they claim victory on moral or intellectual grounds instead.
How does that sound?
The argument becomes, okay, maybe manga makes more money, but that's because it's shallow. Xianxia is the real hardcore stuff. It's philosophical. It's culturally deep. Manga's global success, therefore, must be because it's virtual, low quality, pandering to the lowest common denominator globally.
So they redefine success away from market validation towards some subjective, unprovable cultural essence.
Exactly. If you can't win the game, change the rules.
And this pattern, this need to exaggerate success, claim superiority, even against contrary evidence. It's not just about culture, is it? We see this elsewhere.
It seems to be a recurring pattern, yeah.
Yeah.
Think about the tech sector. That same phrase, Youytube, remotely leading, was heavily promoted around Huawei's breakthroughs with chipsets.
Right. Presented domestically as this huge, decisive win against U.S. sanctions.
But the reality, as reported internationally, was more complex. The narrative often downplayed or ignored things like the low manufacturing yield rates for those advanced chips.
The dependence on foreign tech.
Continued dependence on critical foreign technology, like ASML's lithography machines from the Netherlands, and the fact that, overall, they were still maybe 2 generations behind the absolute cutting edge, like TSMC in Taiwan or Samsung in Korea.
So, same script. Trumpet the domestic achievement, ignore the global context or underlying vulnerabilities.
Pretty much. Exaggerate the win to mask the gap.
Even sports aren't immune.
Remember the 2022 Winter Olympics in Beijing? There was that really unfortunate wave of online attacks from some Chinese netizens against the Japanese figure skater Yuzuru Hanyu.
Oh, yeah. He's globally beloved. What happened?
He was heavily criticized.
I feel.
Called flashy but useless, things like that. It was seen internationally as a really aggressive attempt to tear him down just to elevate local Chinese athletes.
And that backfired.
Drew a lot of international criticism for poor sportsmanship. It just showed how this competitive, compensatory mindset can spill over and contaminate basically any field where national pride is seen as being on the line.
Okay, so this aggressive noise, this market protectionism, it creates another big problem, doesn't it? It seems to shut down anyone who disagrees. The reasonable voices, the moderate ones.
That's a huge consequence, the systematic silencing or marginalization of what you could call the silent majority.
That's the part I find really difficult. Surely there are tons of people in China who enjoy both Xianxia and manga or anime. Why don't they speak up? Why don't they say, hey, let's calm down, appreciate both, stop attacking our neighbors?
Because the personal cost of doing that online is incredibly high. The extremists, the hypernationalists, have effectively weaponized certain labels, turn any moderate stance, any nuance, into an act of disloyalty or even treason. If you dare to defend manga or gently criticize the toxic nationalism, you risk facing immediate, often coordinated digital pile-ons.
What kind of labels are we talking about? What are the killer accusations?
They're really potent. You get called Pontu traitor.
Wow.
Or Buaigua unpatriotic. That's a very serious charge in the current climate. Or specifically Jingri, a spiritually Japanese person, a Japanophile, implying your loyalties are suspect.
Okay.
And they also use the term gengsi aggressively now. Historically, it meant public intellectual, someone contributing to public debate.
But now
it's been successfully twisted into a derogatory term for anyone seen as too critical of the government line or too favorable towards Western or Japanese ideas or culture. Basically an enemy within.
Faced with the risk of being hit with those labels, social media attacks, maybe even real-world consequences, most people will just keep quiet.
Exactly. It creates a classic spiral of silence. Why stick your neck out? The high cost of defending a moderate view, social isolation, getting doxxed, maybe even attracting unwanted official attention makes people just withdraw.
They retreat from the public square.
They retreat from places like Weibo or Bilibili, at least from expressing those views. They might practice what some call voting with their feet. Privately, they'll still watch the anime they like, or maybe quietly critique a Xianxia plot they find weak. But they stay absolutely silent in the public online discourse.
And the outcome of this silencing for how China is perceived globally.
It creates a completely skewed picture because the algorithms amplify the loudest, most emotional, most conflict-hungry voices.
Extremists.
The international community ends up seeing only them. And they mistakenly assume that this loud, aggressive minority represents everyone in China.
Is there data on that perception gap?
Yeah, that Pew data we mentioned earlier supports this. It showed something like 66% of Europeans and Americans surveyed believe that this kind of aggressive nationalism is the mainstream view in China.
So the silencing of the majority directly leads to a distorted international image.
Precisely. Which helps explain why this online behavior often feels so jarring or, frankly, repulsive to outside observers. It feels like political aggression and historical baggage being forced onto pop culture, a space that ideally should be about fun, sharing, mutual appreciation.
Culture gets taken hostage by these other dynamics.
Exactly. So, given all this, how does the rest of the world react? Especially Japan, the country most directly on the receiving end of this specific cultural putdown.
Right. What's the general feeling in Japan about this constant comparison and criticism of their cultural exports?
Well, overwhelmingly negative and quite defensive, understandably. That 2023 Genron NPO survey we talked about, it found 92% of Japanese people view China negatively. 92%.
That's astonishingly high.
It is. And a significant factor they cite is the perceived anti-Japanese rhetoric they see coming from Chinese state media, but also increasingly from this aggressive online commentary from netizens.
That must put Japanese creators, fans, anyone involved in cultural exchange in a really tough spot.
An almost impossible spot. They feel constant pressure to kind of bifurcate their identity. They find themselves always having to explain, look, cultural Japan, the anime, the manga you enjoy is separate from political Japan, the history, the government.
Trying to navigate that minefield when talking to Chinese fans?
Yeah. There's a real worry among Japanese creators and fans that the potential for genuine, enjoyable cultural exchange is being poisoned by these nationalistic demands and this constant dredging up of historical grievances. They just want to share stories, but they keep getting dragged into political arguments.
And the wider world, how does the West, for instance, generally view this aggressive nationalism, sometimes called wolf warrior rhetoric?
It's often seen through a couple of lenses. On the one hand, the immediate negative take is, This looks like authoritarianism, maybe xenophobia, definitely an oversensitivity. It suggests a nation driven by a zero-sum view of the world, unable to compete without trying to tear others down.
Lacking maturity, perhaps.
That's often the implication. But there's usually a more contextual view offered too, especially by scholars who study the region.
Which is?
Recognizing that the intense energy behind this, the drive for cultural revival, economic catch-up, the same energy that builds incredible infrastructure like high-speed rail, comes from the same place as the aggression. It stems from that historical trauma, that desire to overcome the century of humiliation.
So it's a mix. Constructive energy tangled up with destructive insecurity.
Exactly. It's seen as a complex, maybe unstable mix. The drive for Chinese revitalization itself can be seen as positive, but the aggressive nationalism is the toxic side effect, perhaps amplified by the political system.
So stepping back from it all,
Yeah.
what does this mean for the idea of real, genuine cultural confidence? What's the difference between that and this kind of constant aggressive posturing?
Well, genuine cultural confidence, you'd think, is built on actual competence, proven success in the global market, and crucially, the maturity to appreciate differences.
Like being able to enjoy both.
Yeah. Being able to look at a masterpiece from another culture, like Japan's Full Metal Alchemist, and a domestic masterpiece, maybe like Jade Dynasty in the Xianxia realm, and appreciate the unique strengths, the different philosophies, the narrative craft of both, without feeling this overwhelming need to declare one morally or politically superior to the other.
Because if your goal is actually global influence, getting people around the world to genuinely appreciate your culture, constantly belittling the current global leader in pop culture exports seems counterproductive.
Completely counterproductive. This behavior, where your own sense of cultural worth seems to depend on constantly minimizing your neighbor's achievements, especially when the data shows you're lagging behind internationally, it ultimately reveals deep insecurity masquerading as confidence.
And it probably just pushes potential global audiences away.
Alienates consumers, hinders the very cultural exchanges needed for understanding, and ultimately probably delays the genuine international recognition and appreciation of Chinese culture that they seem to crave.
Wow. Okay, this has been quite the exploration, hasn't it? We've really gotten into the weeds of cultural competition, historical memory, and the powerful, sometimes really damaging role psychology plays in shaping online national narratives.
Yeah, we've seen how something genuinely appealing, like Xianxia stories, can get kind of weaponized, used as this compensatory strategy, fueled by historical narratives, amplified by political messaging, boosted by market competition, and then put on hyperdrive by social media algorithms.
It seems the core finding, if we boil it down, is this idea of compensatory self-aggrandizement.
Right. It looks like a defensive mechanism, where you try to lift yourself up not through achieving genuine global success that speaks for itself, but by aggressively pushing others down, especially when the objective numbers, the global market data, show a really big gap.
So we want to leave you, our listeners, with something to think about. A provocative question, maybe.
Go for it.
If a nation's sense of self-worth, or at least a very loud part of its online voice, seems constantly dependent on minimizing its neighbors, what kind of art does that ultimately produce? What happens to creativity when the main goal isn't necessarily excellence or enjoyment, but asserting political or moral superiority?
Does that truly elevate the culture in the long run? Or does it just make the rest of the world tune out the conversation?
Something to definitely mull over.
Yeah. Well, thank you everyone for joining us today on Sip and Talk.
It was great having you with us. If you found this discussion insightful or just interesting, please do subscribe to Sip and Talk wherever you get your audio content.
And hey, check out our good friend Mickey's YouTube channel. It's called Mickytolife. Seriously, fun stuff, memes, liquor tastings. He's always got the latest European travel vlogs going. Really worth a look.
Absolutely. Mickytolife on YouTube.
As always, we try to approach these topics using objective information and just encourage independent thinking. Our goal is just to explore the facts as presented, not to endorse any viewpoint or criticize any group.
Just laying out the information for you to consider. We'll catch you next time on Sip and Talk.
Bye, everyone.
Bye for now.